everyone, thanks for tuning in. My name's Jemima. I'm in recovery from an eating disorder and I'm finding faith through the fight. So today I thought that I would look at something I've been asked about on my Instagram and give you my 5 top tips to prevent a binge. But before we do that, what is a binge? So a binge would be described as consuming an amount of food that's larger than normal in a shorter period of time. This is normally done a bit faster than normal and is quite uncomfortable, as well as it bringing lots of embarrassment, and sometimes people binge when they're not hungry at all. And the most important thing is that when you binge, you feel very out of control. I do also want to point out that just because you binge does not mean that you have binge eating disorder. Lots of people binge just because of restriction or other reasons. The tips I'm going to be giving today are not for people who are recovering from BED, i.e. binge eating disorder. These are tips which are for people who have been recovering from a restrictive eating disorder, such as bulimia, anorexia, or OSFED, or anything kind of in between. So anything where you restrict your food. This is also helpful for people who haven't been diagnosed with an eating disorder, but who are maybe trying to diet or restricting their food and are finding that binging is a big problem. So I saw something recently which kind of categorized binges into a couple of categories. The first one was a physical binge and the second one was an emotional binge. Now, a physical binge is when you deal with a physical need, and it's usually because you've restricted your food that you've become so hungry that your body goes crazy when it's around food and you end up eating loads. And an emotional binge is when your emotions trigger you to want to binge or eat a lot of foods. And we normally deal with that by looking into those emotions, and the methods dealing with that are quite specific to specific people. So if you are struggling with emotional binges and it's not because you're restricting your food, I would highly recommend that you go and speak to a counsellor or a therapist and get professional help. But something you can do for the time being is ask yourself, what am I really lacking and what do I really need? What am I lacking emotionally? What am I lacking spiritually? And will food really solve this? Normally the answer's no, and you actually need to turn to something else. Or I was told by a friend today that there is actually another category, which is when you just binge because it's routine and you have an eating disorder. So now we've discussed what a binge is, let's get into my 5 top tips of how to avoid binging. Number 1, eat enough and eat regularly. Yes, that means having all of your meals. If you're following a meal plan, stick to it. Most people, when they're on a weight gain meal plan, have to have 3 meals and 3 snacks every day. Even on a weight maintenance meal plan, you still have 3 meals and 2 snacks. And to be honest, if you're listening to your body, that might end up eating more than on your meal plan. If you don't have a meal plan because you're not recovering from an eating disorder, make sure that you are eating your meals regularly. Eat enough in those meals and eat enough carbs, fats, and protein, and get a good mixture of foods and food groups on your plates. Eat foods that are going to satisfy you and fill you up, but also have really good nutritional value for your body. Your body needs fuel, so even if you're not hungry, because some people do lose their hunger signals when they restrict and when they stop listening to them for such a long time. So if you are struggling with not being hungry, just go back to that 3 meals, 2 snacks rule. It is advised that you eat something every 2 to 3 hours, but if you're more hungry than that, then that's okay. Point number 2, do not restrict at any point. Now this is both physically and mentally. Physical restriction is when you stop yourself from eating something. For example, skipping meals, or even not eating for a whole day, or even just skipping a snack. Or it could be only having half of a meal or a little bit of a smaller portion because you think that's better for you, but you're going to be more triggered to binge later on. You have to stop dieting. Dieting is restricting, and the more you try and diet, the more you're going to binge. It's proven that diets don't work. 95% of diets don't work, and you end up actually putting the weight back on and more. On that note, try and listen to your cravings if you can. This is slightly different if you're struggling with binge eating disorder, but if your body's asking for a chocolate bar, then go and have a chocolate bar. If you deny your body of that craving, then you're only going to end up eating something else that is not satisfying and then binging on that thing you really wanted later on. Similarly, with mental restriction, it might not look like you're restricting your food to yourself or other people, but if you're telling yourself you can only have 1 scoop of ice cream or 1 cookie or 1 biscuit, or you're only allowed half a banana, then that is also a type of restriction as well, and it's going to trigger a binge later on. Top tip number 3. take the focus off of you. If you've met all of your physical needs and you still are afraid of binging or feel like there's an urge coming up, ask a friend to sit with you whilst you run through that urge and whilst you fight that urge. Now the urge it's a little bit like a curve, so the urge will kind of grow and it will get stronger, but then it will go back down again, and you have to trust that process. Often getting a friend to sit with you can be a really good way of distracting yourself because it takes the attention off of you and onto them because you're trying to have a conversation with them or do an activity with them. It's also a good idea when you feel a bit more confident to go and have that food that you're craving. Just have a small bit and have it with a friend sitting there so they can keep you accountable. It's a good idea to do a non-strenuous activity with a friend, and I often pray because this puts my attention onto God and takes it off from me and also puts my situation into perspective. Number 4 is don't beat yourself up about it. Forgive yourself. You haven't failed just because you've binged. Yes, it will make you feel embarrassed and you'll probably feel shameful, but the more you try not to feel those things, the less likely you are to restrict afterwards and the less likely you are to binge again. Especially if you're recovering from a restrictive eating disorder, binging is not a bad thing. Your body is very clever and it's protecting you. Think about it this way. Your body needs air to breathe and to live, right? So if you hold your breath for a really long time and deny of that air, when you finally breathe again, it's gonna gasp for air and you're going to end up taking in more air than usual. The same applies to water. If you deny your body of water for a long period of time, you get really thirsty and will probably down a whole bottle of water at once. The same thing happens when you deny yourself of food. So the fact that you've binged is really just your body protecting yourself and being incredibly clever. Instead of beating yourself up about it, why don't you do something to show love to your body? Maybe have a pamper night, wear something comfy, or have a bath. And the most important thing is do not restrict afterwards. No matter how full and disgusting you might feel, eat your next meal or eat your next snack. Do not deny yourself of more food because that will just start the binge restrict cycle and you'll end up binging again. And remember that one binge is not going to change your body, just like one day of dieting doesn't change your body either. The less emphasis you give it, the better. And my tip number 5 is learn from it. See each binge as a way to learn. Stopping in the middle of a binge is really, really hard. Often once you've started binging, you just can't stop. So if you try and notice and observe what is happening as you get an urge to binge and as you're binging, you can use that to learn from it and stop them in the future. Now, I do want to say that just because you try these things, and if you're struggling with binge eating, it's not something that will disappear overnight. But the episodes will get slowly less and less frequent until you don't binge at all. And I also want to say that if you're recovering from an incredibly restrictive eating disorder, such as anorexia, your body often goes into extreme hunger once you start eating properly again. You might have these binge episodes which are actually good for your body. Your body is very, very hungry because you've denied it of food for such a long time. So listen to it. Here we wouldn't actually call it a binge, we would call it feast eating because your body really needs those nutrients, whether they're highly calorific or not. Your body knows what it's doing, and even though it's scary, it's okay and it will die down. So that's all I've got on binging for today. I hope that was helpful, and if you have any questions, do put them in the comments below.